Kaimere is a distant planet. It is defined by waves of life brought from Earth and set free to evolve independently in this new context. The indigenous life of the planet, swarms of microbes called magic by the people who live there, are what harvest Earth organisms and make copies on Kaimere. As the asteroid which concluded the Mesozoic never struck Kaimere, dinosaurs remain the dominant terrestrial megafauna.
Around 190 million years ago, a wound on the surface leading down to Kaimere's inner core bled up to the surface, spewing forth a torrent of heat, carbon dioxide, and toxic chemicals into the atmosphere. As on Earth, the tectonic plates of Kaimere are in a cycle wherein every half-billion years or so, the drift of the continental plates brings them all together. Though the continents were united early in the Permian dynasty, they had long since begun to fracture. However, 190 million years ago, there was a spike in this motion and its consequences. It is currently unknown where this rift occurred. The dynastic extinction was a prelude to the modern cast of flora and fauna 15 million years ago, and was primarily within the modern known world, and a combination of local impact and more recent occurrence means these events are fairly well understood. The Great Library has records of volcanism in southern Kyrule and western Kaishel, estimated to correspond to this era, and it is likely that the breaking apart of these two great continents is what triggered the extinction, but it has not been independently verified by the Assembly. However, regardless of where this happened, the consequences of this event are recorded in the geological history of the known world. It may not be exactly known where this occurred, but the dates are well documented in its aftermath. The planet was fairly arid before this spike in volcanism, and a sudden surge in heat made sea levels rise. More seaways between smaller continents facilitated the spread of water inland, and more CO2 facilitated the return of the wetlands which had defined the planet back during the first dynasty. The therapsids, which had dominated during the arid conditions, in many cases becoming specialized to this world, were now struggling to adapt. There had been a few patches of wetland in this otherwise dry world, and relics of the first dynasty were among those given a second chance. Unfortunately, for those struggling or rising in the sudden shift of status quo, the portal brought in several waves of new flora and fauna from analogous conditions on Earth. Coming in larger and pre-adapted to a world the native life was struggling to change to, gave these newcomers a tremendous advantage. These invaders were the archosaurs, king reptiles, and with their ascension began a new dynasty which still holds the title of apex predator and largest herbivores still to this day. Where and when these harvests occurred is unknown. Many of the flora and fauna resemble taxa from the Kayenta and Shishigo formations, so it is probably early Jurassic harvests from at least North America and Asia, though considering Earth was also connected at this time, it may be a coincidence of these happening to be well-sampled regions in the time and place of our world, and the animals were generally perhaps more cosmopolitan. As explained in Croc Month, there are two major clades of archosaurs. Avametatarsalia are the bird-line archosaurs, while pseudosuchia are the croc-line archosaurs. Bird-line archosaurs were taken during this era, and the first dinosaurs of Kaimere were not without their success, but especially in the wetlands and dense jungles which dominated the tropics at this time, Kaimere's first Mesozoic dynasty was not ruled by dinosaurs. The most abundant and diverse clade, to which the apex predators belonged, were the pseudosuchians. This was the Age of Crocodiles. Kyrule and Nikkar were still connected together in a tropical supercontinent. Though the horse latitudes of the north and south were in many places harsh deserts, having many seaways cutting through the major continents meant the tropics were a verdant jungle and wetland often hammered by constant monsoons. This hot and humid climate was a chaotic world, but it was teeming with life. Crocodile archosaurs have been devastated following the end Triassic extinction on Earth, with the Crocodilomorpha being the only clade in this line confirmed to have been harvested and introduced to Kaimere. While exact dates aren't known this far back, there are strata with a striking divide between Therapsid and Archosaur distinctions on either side of the dynastic borders. An animal similar to Protosuchus is a very common find in Nikari sites which appear to show this boundary. While theropods, similar to Dilophosaurus, increased in their dimensions and went on to become apex predators in many environments, a clade of basal Protosuchians grew quite massive in their own right, in many weeks converging with the Rauisuchians of Earth's Triassic. Tyrannosuchia was represented by their nominative genus Tyrannosuchus quite early in the Age of Crocodiles. This Protosuchian reached tremendous size, with the skull of Tyrannosuchus nacarensis having a skull of similar dimensions to Tyrannosaurus rex. Their bite force was comparably extreme. Several specimens of prosauropod and archosaur show damage to even long bones, and in the case of at least one prosauropod, the injury began to heal, suggesting even after this devastating attack, it managed to escape, confirming that this 5 to 7 ton pseudosuchian was not a full-time scavenger. It is believed the bite of Tyrannosuchus would have been among the most horrid of weapons, likely used to break leg and back from an ambush. A popular target, at least while hunting archosaurs, was the base of the tail. The caudofemoralis muscles, which were the power behind dinosaur locomotions, so tearing through this muscle system, or the bones to which they were attached, could quickly disable. Modern megaraptorans lack the bite force for this maneuver, though injuries to hadrosaur tails suggest the tyrannosaurs of their Chimeran dynasty favored a similar tactic. Giant predators weren't the only niche explored by Protosuchians. There were many herbivores as well. Paleosuchia includes the ancestors of modern Chelisuchus, the turtle croc, and of Campsocnids, the sloth crocs. Both were quite successful herbivores in the dense forests of this era, using toothed beaks to process a wide range of foliage. The more basal Paleosuchians were perhaps the most successful at this time, with some formations showing them to be the most abundant megafauna. Perhaps strangest of this group were the armored archosaurs. They weren't as common as other herbivorous clades, but they were a staple of this dynasty throughout Nikar and Kyrule. Chilidraco was their largest member, found toward the end of the Age of Crocodiles. Though large-bodied, they were quite low to the ground. A long, sharp beak is believed to have been important in essentially mowing through low vegetation like horsetails and ferns, which formed vast, lush prairies between the forests and swamps. Some of this vegetation could be quite tough. Even woody plants were cut through on occasion. Only the largest Tyrannosuchians were a viable threat, and even they would need to be wary of this long beak, which was strong enough to shear through saplings and could do a lot of damage against animals that didn't give them a wide berth. While they sported a very heavy tail club, it appears this was mostly used against others of their kind, or to fend off attacks to the flanks. Useful in deterring the large predators which favored rear assault, but not as devastating a defense as they might initially appear. A fairly successful clade of small predatory pseudosuchians, the allochevrons, were having a boom of success as well. They are so named for their chevrons, bones below the tail vertebrae, having a deep central groove and a broad point of contact, making them fairly easy to diagnose compared to other skeletal elements, which could be confused for contemporaneous theropods. Many of them strongly resemble theropods of the time, leading to a lot of early confusion, especially considering they had hollow bones and an extensive air sac system seemingly independently evolved from these seen in birdline archosaurs. It seems the relative abundance of the allochevrons in this era may have been down to their metabolism. In the tropics, it was a very hot and wet climate, so they didn't need a fast metabolism to keep warm, and many features of their skeletal and respiratory system helped keep them cool. They needed less than half as much food as theropods they lived alongside and competed against of the same size, which would have been a tremendous advantage. In times of scarcity, they could get by on less, and populations could be larger on the same resources. While the Tyrannosuchians were the top predator in the tropics, many of the vassals were allochevrons. At 8 meters and 2 tons, Apatosuchus was the allochevron genus, which were the most abundant large predator of these tropical forests. That's not to say that dinosaurs weren't successful. Indeed, they had their breakout stars. Prosauropods, or basal sauropodomorphs as they are generally called today, are often right behind the Paleosuchians in terms of diversity in many formations. The faster metabolism of dinosaurs meant they tended to have greater endurance, therefore tended to do better in open territory. Mostly, though, their advantage was in temperate latitudes. Places that in this vast supercontinent, a fast and stable metabolism meant that they could function consistently regardless of the season. In the Age of Crocodiles, dinosaurs spread throughout what is today Kyrule and Nikar. However, it was only in the temperate forests, north and south of the horse latitudes, that they were the dominant fauna. The largest dinosaurs of this dynasty, and indeed, largest terrestrial animals known at the time, were the parasauropods. They are thought to have evolved from bipedal mesospondylids. Some retained this basal condition, and indeed were extremely abundant, especially successful, early in the dynasty. However, the nominative clade includes more derived members restricted to all fours. It is thought that they lacked the intensive air sac system of true sauropods, which may be why they did not surpass the conventional tetrapod maximum of 20 tons, but they still got quite enormous. Lacking this air sac system, or at least to the degree that modern titans have, also enabled them to endure much colder temperatures than modern titanosaurs seem comfortable with. Kaimere's first megatheropod appears to have evolved from an animal similar to Dilophosaurus, though the exact phylogeny is unknown. The largest genus, Copodon, evolved in the southern hemisphere, and their flat, blade-shaped teeth are commonly found in later strata of the Age of Crocodiles. They could reach lengths of 8 to 10 meters, with mass estimates between 2 and 4 tons. Not in the same league as tyrannosaurs, megaraptorans, and carcharodontosaurs of later years, and not even the biggest predator in their age, considering the tropical Tyrannosuchians, but certainly a large and impressive king of their domain. In the northern temperate forests, theropods didn't seem to get as large as in the south, but a descendant of a tetanurans similar to Monolophosaurus seems to have been the top predator in these northern forests. This animal, called Thosteratosaurus, is estimated to be around half a ton, with a length of 7 meters. Their slender jaws didn't look too particularly powerful. They were packed with far more and much smaller teeth than Copodon, but these teeth were heavily serrated, and skulls surprisingly strong despite low bite force estimates. Some prey species have been found with cut marks on their bones, and in a few cases even cutting into the bone enough to break. It seems that while they were not breaking into bones through brute force like the giant Tyrannosuchus to the south, but they were still capable of processing bones thanks to intensive sawing motions. There are several bone beds excavated and housed in the Great Library featuring multiple Thausteratosaurus found together. Many cite this as evidence that they were social predators, perhaps hunting in groups. Probably not with the complexity and coordination of megaraptorans like the Uctan, or carnivoran packs like hyenas and wolves, but still in groups of these bone-saw-jawed hunters may have been the key to their success in the northern forests. There were some early ornithischians, but they appear to generally have been restricted to the forests of the southern hemisphere at this time. Most were very small. While on Earth these would go on to evolve into the armored dinosaurs and earliest ornithopods, in Kaimere these lineages remained quite small. One exception was an animal called Stegosaurus. Though its name implies ancestry to Stegosaurus, it is now generally thought that this stem thyreophoran was a sister lineage to Stegosaurs, not technically within the group. However, it was a similar animal and quite successful in the later years of the Age of Crocodiles. Like other ornithischians, they were restricted to the south, though considering Kyrule and Nikar were connected, their spread was much further. They got quite large and had more extensive armor than stegosaurs, yet still superficially resembled them quite closely. The birdline archosaurs had not yet produced the first true birds, or at least these had not been collected, or they just haven't been found. However, the first pterosaurs were certainly collected at this time, and their fossils are quite abundant. During the first dynasty, the skies of Kaimere were still packed with aeroplankton, serving as a caloric incentive for many clades to evolve flight. Then, during the Permian dynasty, it has long been assumed that this plankton base perished. They thrive in humid conditions, and the Permian dynasty was quite arid, so most assume they went extinct or were at least heavily reduced. However, a swift surge and success of aerial clades in this period has led some assembly naturalists to propose that aeroplankton persisted in humid regions of the Permian dynasty and may well have returned to their pre-Permian populations as the planet became humid and welcoming to them once more. A variety of flying taurostians, a clade which evolved in Kaimere during the First Dynasty and held on in a few jungles, erupted as well, all seemingly specialized in filter feeding while flying. This prey base of flying filter feeders supported the evolution of not only some other native predator like a lineage of large volant heterotherms, a more famously supported giant pterosaurs. These were not the giant pterodactyls of modern Kaimere such as Asdarchids and Tapijards. No, these were dimorphodonts, large-headed and toothy gremlins, which were quite successful as sparrow to eagle-sized pterosaurs, common throughout Kaimere at the time. One group became extremely large on a diet of these filter feeders, with Limoventus being among the largest pterosaurs to ever evolve in Kaimere. Limoventus, the hungry wind, would have been a very clumsy flyer. Considering the filter feeders they were going after weren't particularly aerobatic either, this seems to not have hindered them. They possessed 4 wings. Though it was initially believed all were involved in generating lift, it has since been proposed that the lower wings were more involved with steering and perhaps aiding in takeoff. Limoventus would have been a voracious hunter. Thankfully, their prey was in tremendous abundance in the wetlands. Takeoff would have been a challenge in closed forests, but robust hands and foot claws hint at proficient climbing. Maybe they took off from nearby cliffs or, as been suggested by Dr. Durant, they may have instead climbed trees and taken off from there. Despite a 30-foot wingspan, they were extremely likely built and filled with air sacs. They likely didn't weigh much more than 150 kilos. perhaps 200 in the largest specimens. While archosaurs were certainly the most abundant and successful megafauna of this era, at least within the fossil record of the known world, there were some native taxa still present. Among the niches occupied by mammals of Jurassic Earth, it was therocephalians which generally dominated. Largest of these was Nemeoscelion, a macropredatory therocephalian which was around the size of a lion and seems to have been a fairly successful cursorial predator in the arid deserts and forests of the southern hemisphere. First Dynasty relics didn't reach their heights during this age, but there were several clades which presented megafaunal representatives. Ambuloichthyans of the tropical forests of Nikar seem to have been particularly successful. A large animal, Centaurichthyes, was a social browsing herbivore with a moose-sized species known to be preyed upon by Apatosuchus. While the lands of the Permian dynasty were arid and in many cases struggling, the oceans had been booming with life. Tremendous diversity of megafauna, including many marine therapsids, could be found. The volcanism ending the Permian dynasty hit the oceans extremely hard, and the excess nutrients, coupled with seemingly swiftly warming climates, melted the poles and caused algal and magical blooms, in some cases rivaling the prelude of the first dynasty. The first Jurassic dynasty had its marine fauna, but most were from the Jurassic of Earth. One lineage of therapsid did persist, the mosasaur-like ichthyotheres. Ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs outcompeted many of their smaller relatives, but Ichthyotherium itself had several species go on to become apex predators of the first Mesozoic dynasty. The largest and latest was Ichthyotherium ionaci, which could reach lengths of 13 meters and was the undisputed apex predator of the oceans in the southern hemisphere. All told, this was a golden age of life in Kaimere. Resources were abundant, but since most of the old guard was extinct, it was still an extremely competitive era, as many clades tried their hand at top-order niches. Later dynasties would see greater diversity as the climate cooled and more niches became available, but this was arguably the most competitive age, for so many new opportunities were there for the taking. The pseudosuchians ruled the tropics, but once things cooled down, it would be their cousins already dominating on Earth at the time who would take the throne. But that's a story for next week. Cheers to J-Rex for sponsoring this episode. It's the first in a series, covered by another sponsor. I'm very excited for this series as it gives me a chance to explore a wide range of clades, both familiar and strange. Some of the animals you will meet today will continue on to the next of 4 Mesozoic dynasties, while other lineages will end here. Thanks again to J-Rex, to my Patreon patrons for your continued support, and thank you so much for watching. Cheers, folks!